In this module, so far we have talked about competition and strategy and how it impacts firms operating in an industry. We talked about the airline industry, and here we have a live example of an airline from the Indian airline industry. We have today the privilege of chatting with Captain Guru Ramaswamy Iyengar Gopinath, also known as Captain R. Gopinath, who is a doyen of the airline industry in India. Captain Gopinath is an Indian Army veteran, an entrepreneur, an author, and a part-time political activist. From its humble beginnings in 2003 with 2 aircraft, by the time Captain Gopinath decided to exit the industry in 2007, it had over 45 aircrafts and serviced over 70 destinations and had become India's fastest growing airline and the largest one domestically. So thank you very much, Captain Gopinath, for speaking to us. Let me start with the question that everybody has been asking. Competing in the airline industry is very tough. In fact, if you examine the airline industry in India, there's been a bloodbath for the last 2 decades. So how is it competing in this industry?
Not just India, I think if you look at the airline industry across the globe, it has had the highest number of what do you call failures, bankruptcies. The most legendary airlines. It could be United Airlines, US Airways, Northwest, Delta, or Air Canada, or Swiss Air, KLM, all the big name, Pan Am, TWA, almost everything that in terms of aviation industry brands, they all went into bankruptcies, and some of them completely exited or filed for bankruptcies under the Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in America. It is a tough industry because it is very easy to lose money very fast and become a negative net worth industry and get into a cash flow problem. I used to joke once that when I used to keep signing checks, that my checks are flying faster than the aircraft. That's because the nature of the industry is such that because once you announce a schedule, you're in a catch-22. The aircraft, let's say, if it is supposed to take off at 8 o'clock in the morning, whether there's and if it is a 200-seater aircraft, whether you have 1 passenger or 200 passengers, it has to take off. Sometimes even if there's 0 passenger, you have to take off because you have to pick up the passenger from the other side. And if you cancel the flights, it will further, you're putting one more nail in the coffin, because if you say, I'm having a low occupancy, if you cancel it, then occupancy will dive down further. It is tough because it is very live. You have to be fast and you have to be safe, and not one without the other. You can't be safe and be on the ground. Neither can you be fast and be unsafe. And to get everything together to make it happen, and managing all the different components which are disparate is tough. So getting the execution right is very, very, very tough.
So why did you decide to get into this really tough industry?
In Bangalore, going to the Army Club, and I came across a friend of mine, old Army buddy, who was a pilot, called Captain Samuel, who was my buddy. We were bunker mates. We had fought the war together. He was a helicopter pilot. So he had taken a premature retirement and had come to Bangalore. And I found that he didn't have a job. So actually the idea came from him initially. He said, let's do something in the helicopter business. And but he had no idea of business, and I had no idea of the aviation industry. So one day this thought came to me when he suggested this initially, that he was not getting a job because there were no helicopters in India. Whatever helicopters were there with some of the corporates, the Birlas or Malia had a helicopter, Birla had a helicopter, but they were using for personal use. They were not using it for public. And India was on the way to reforms, and there were pilots without jobs, and there was not a single helicopter company. So these three things, that there was nobody in that space except for personal use, not for the public use. There was one like Air India, Pawan Hans, which is a government company. So I felt that it was a great opportunity because the country was now suddenly opening up in reforms after China had become a capitalist country, market economy, without abandoning communism. The Russian communism had collapsed, and I felt in my bones that India cannot now be in isolation because there were no jobs. And the state government was not able to create jobs. And there were the early days when state governments started competing with each other because politicians were losing their elections because they were not able to deliver on jobs, they were not able to deliver on economic growth. They were not able to give basic services. There was a single television channel. You had to wait for 10 years for a telephone. And that was the beginning of a new India I saw. And I saw this new India in my mind's eye as a country which is now going to become entrepreneurial. And I instinctively realized that what was required was to be in a space where you can be different. And it occurred to me that I had no competition because the guys who had helicopters, they were not dependent on helicopters for their living. In the sense that if Rahul Bajaj had a helicopter, he was having the helicopter on the balance sheet of Bajaj Scooters. So he was selling scooters to buy a helicopter for personal use. He was not having a helicopter to make money from customers. So they were not customer focused because they were not customer dependent. His focus was dependency on selling of scooters. If Mahindra had a crowd, he was selling jeeps. So then it occurred to me that this is a good opportunity. We had pilots without jobs. We had engineers without jobs, who were all ex-Army and Air Force and Navy, where I had a good network, including my friend who had this knowledge because he was an outstanding pilot. And then I came with this idea that I must set up a helicopter company. Because of my reading and my army experience, I knew that helicopters were a highway in the sky. It could be deployed for not just the glamour applications. Helicopters are used for geophysical survey, for aerial mapping, geophysical survey for mapping the underground mineral wealth, aerial photography, oil support for oil rigs, tourism, pipeline survey, electrical pipeline survey in the mountains, carrying loads into the mountains, whole lot of applications. All that came in my mind, and I said, let's set up a helicopter company. But I never asked how much does a helicopter cost, fortunately. And it never occurred to me to go to McKinsey to get a project report, because if you're obsessed with an idea, I think it's true then, it's true today, it's true tomorrow. That I think your energy and your passion is more important than capital. And there was the early days of venture capital, but venture capital was all going into IT. It was just beginning, but it was all going to IT. So I said, let me launch this. How, where the resources will come, I did not know. But I knew that if I have the people, if I have the license, if I have a good business, the funds will come. And that's exactly what happened. And so I set up this company where you are now sitting, right, where you see helicopters around. So we applied for a license in '95. Then I asked Captain Sam to join me, and he joined me. And I think we succeeded because of people like him and the others who joined, where we complemented each other's strengths. So we applied in '95, and after 2 years and 10 months, in '97, it took us almost 2.5 to 3 years to get our all the various clearances. But of course, we did not have a thing like, we'll do it for 6 months. If it doesn't come, then we'll give up. We said, you keep going, you don't stop. You keep knocking at the doors, and somebody will open the door. I think I was superstitious in that sense that if you don't give up, doors will open.
You had this really successful model with the helicopter charter.
Yeah. So we started with one helicopter.
Yes.
Here. All these buildings were not there. We were in a tent here initially. I think there's some affinity because I was in my tent in my farm too for about 2 years. So we were in a tent here, and we slowly built the business. Our business was in the clouds, our head was not in the clouds. Our feet were firmly on the ground. Our pilots, my other founding directors, Captain Sam, Captain Povaya, who is also here, they all pitched in. The pilot was a salesman. He was a cleaner of the aircraft. They all sacrificed and built the company brick by brick without any extravagance, and with the total passion and commitment. And so, of course, it was not easy. We went through tough times, but within the first year we were breaking even. Then I added a second helicopter, a third, a fourth, a fifth. Then we added fixed wing small planes. So by 2003, I had about 12 aircrafts, purely on charter, and we were doing all the things that I spoke about. We had contracts for gas pipeline survey. We had one helicopter on contract for oil platforms to carry the crew and equipment to the oil platforms with Kane Energy. We had contracts with Reliance for gas pipeline survey. Then we did aerial mapping, aerial photography. We also did geophysical survey because mining was opened up by the government. So foreign companies were engaged to do the mineral survey. Then tourism opened up. So then politicians started using it for helicopters. Ministers started using the helicopters. In the earlier era, they were not using the helicopter because they didn't want to present a face of themselves which was alienated from the public. They wanted to show that they were simple, though they were corrupt. But I think the people understood that there's a new age has come, that the helicopters are seen as a business tool when it was used for business rather than as a luxurious toy. So we grew very quickly to become the largest general aviation charter company in these areas which I spoke about. And at that time, in those 6-7 years, a new India had emerged. I was seeing it, but not seeing it. But I could touch it, I could feel it. It was escaping me. There was something which was palpable. A new vibrancy had emerged in the wake of the reforms of Mr. Narasimha Rao. And it suddenly occurred to me one day when I was flying in the chopper, Goa to Bangalore. And when we were deep over some remote areas, I found these huts appearing, and along with that I could see something reflecting and disappearing. So I told my pilot, let's fly down a bit and go lower. And I found that in the middle of all these villages, even in the remote village, there would be one large dish antenna. Not the DTV, dish TV that you find outside the house, where every house has one. In those days, there was an entrepreneur in the village who would collect 1,000 rupees from some 30 houses. If there were 500 houses in the village, he would collect from 30 houses some 1,000 rupees and put one dish antenna and give them connections. And for 300-400 rupees, he was giving a TV, connection. And by which time we already had about 7-8 channels. We had 24/7 channels that started coming. And the other villagers would go to these villages, houses, and see the television. So I suddenly realized that it was a new country. It was no longer a billion people, hungry to be fed and subsidized, but a billion hungry consumers. The growth was already appearing in not from Bombay, Delhi. It was already happening because I could see when I went to my farm, which I keep going even now. The people were using toothpaste, for example, as against using the tooth powder or using neem. The girls were using small shampoo packets. So there was a new motorcycles had started. So the growth for many of these companies was coming from rural India. But the refrigerators started appearing in houses, television started mushrooming. Because what was television doing? Because in between the programs and serials, they were advertising, asking you to buy this, buy that. But I never saw an advertisement for an A-ticket. So that was what hit me. I said they were buying everything except A-tickets. And then it flashed in my mind that with a lot of other things that were simultaneously happening, because I was on a flight to Phoenix, in the US, and I was on an airline called Southwest Airlines, very famous airline. And the guy who was sitting next to me, was a big guy, eating his burger, with tattoos. And so I just asked him, what do you do? And he said he was a carpenter, who had a carpentry job. So then this idea crossed my mind that, middle class India at least must start flying. Our mechanics must start flying, because I know that even in my helicopter company, more than my directors, it is important to send the mechanic first. Even here in a bank, if a bank telling machine computer has got a glitch, you need to send the mechanic first by air, then the clerk, because you need to fix the machines which are production oriented in an oil company or in an industry. You need to get that critical. But what would happen? It was an officer and a non-officer class. The officer who is useless would go by air, and the non-officer would go by, And I remember even earlier when people would come, the cameraman would come by train. But nothing can happen till he comes. So all this went through my mind, and I said, we need aviation to be integral to economic growth.